Hello, everyone. Welcome to what I think is a new format. I may have tried this ages ago. I don't know if I did. If I did, then, well, it's back in a slightly new format. If I didn't, then, well, it's brand new. So, all good. Anyway, we're going to do some book reviews. So, I'm going to follow a pattern that seems to work in my mind, at least, where we're going to look at one book that has been around for a while, and you should be able to get, at least on the secondhand market, that I highly recommend, followed by two books that have come out either very recently or are due to come out, that have been provided to me either by the publishers or I've just pre-ordered them and read them and found them to be pretty good. So, starting in no particular order, actually, no, starting in a very particular order, we're going to start with the older book first. This one is one I would recommend. This way, so I can still speak to the microphone. So, well, the clue's in the name: Battleships in Transition, the creation of the steam battle fleet 1815 to 1860 by Andrew Lambert. It's not the thickest of books, as you can see, but it is packed with a lot of information, and it's been out for quite a while. Several copies have come across my shelves at various points, but this is one of the ones that's in better condition. So Andrew Lambert doesn't really need much introduction, Lawton Professor of Naval History at King's College and all that, but one of the reasons why I definitely recommend this book is because its subject matter, which is, of course, the sailing ships that are then converted into steam vessels and the wooden steamships that come after them before you get to bits like Warrior and Gloire, that's not really a subject that's massively well covered in naval history publications. You've got plenty of stuff on the Napoleonic ships. You've got plenty of stuff on the ironclads, but how you get from one to the other, although there are books out there, it's not anywhere near as widely covered. And although it's a somewhat older publication, as I say, it is still a really good one. You saw there's some plans, there's a discussion of an illustration of engines. And as we go forward, you get into the ironclad era, and it also explains somewhat about how the ships coped with the ironclad era. So you can see here, hopefully it's in focus, that is, of course, the Austrian Kaiser in the aftermath of the Battle of Lissa. Also talks about how the various ships coped in the Crimean War, because, of course, that was a war almost entirely fought by sailing vessels and steam-powered wooden warships, or at least with wooden auxiliaries. There's plenty of good deck plans as well, if you ever wanted to see how much of an impact the installation of steam power has on the fighting power of a wooden warship. And it goes all the way up into, obviously, the dawn of the Iron Era. And at the back is also very handily supplied, if I just go through a few of these, very handily supplied with short lists of the various capabilities of the ships that it discusses. So here's a section. So as you can see, it's ending up here with the Mersey class frigates. So that's the end of the Royal Navy section. You've got new construction for the French, major conversions for the French, that's over here, and minor conversions. And you've got all sorts of statistics, dimensions, displacement, armament at the time, what kind of engines they've got, not just in terms of their power, but also in terms of who manufactured them, which can be quite important because different manufacturers actually can install different kinds of engines. So if you're looking at, say, a Penn engine compared to a Maudslay engine, that it's not that, like you'd have in, say, the early 20th century with vertical triple expansion engines, where there'd be some differences, but broadly they all look similar. Now, in this area, they can be very, very different. So yeah, definitely recommend that book if you can get a hold of a copy for yourself. Now, coming on to a pair of new publications. These have both been very kindly provided to me by Osprey Press. So thank you very much to them. And obviously links below in the description to where you can get them from them, but obviously also available internationally in all good bookstores. The first one's a slightly smaller one. This one I was quite keen to have a look at because, well, Italian Battle Fleet, 1940 to 43, and my hand is in the way. No, wrong hand. You see, it's by Enrico Cernuschi. I think that's how it's pronounced anyway. I apologize to Mr. Cernuschi if I have mispronounced his name. But this is part of a series that Osprey are doing. You've probably seen various other Osprey stuff that they've done, like the new Vanguard series. But this is their Fleet series. So this is Fleet 6. And if you just go to the opening cover page, they've so far done the Japanese Combined Fleet, 41 to 42, the German High Seas Fleet, World War One, British Pacific Fleet, 44 to 45, the US 7th Fleet in Vietnam, the Royal Navy Home Fleet, 39 to 41, and the US Navy Pacific Fleet in 1941 specifically, so in the immediate run-up to World War One, all by a variety of authors. Now, so there's 7 as of the time of printing this one. This is obviously number 6. So, and I know Enrico Sanusci's work from other publications that he's done, including numerous articles in the Warship Journal series. So I know that he's a very high quality Italian historian, naval researcher. So I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. What's he got to say? And I'm glad to say that, as well as having a mixture of both photos and, as you can see, color illustrations by Edward A. Groult. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. It's actually a really good little guide to the Regia Mariner in World War II. Now, of course, being that it's 79 pages, well, actually 77 pages of text, and then bibliography and index, obviously it can't cover everything in extreme detail. So if you want extreme detail on, say, the Littorio class, well, there's a book that probably weighs as much as 10 of these put together and more that just covers the Littorios. But if you want a good sort of pricey medium length summary of what the Regia Mariner was getting up to and why, which is a very important element during the Second World War, then, for the price, absolutely, I would recommend this. And there's a few good reasons for that. Firstly, we start off with the fleet purpose. Why was the Regia Mariner around in the first place? How did it interact with the various other navies who had a presence in the Mediterranean? What was its doctrine? Then looks into the interwar development of the fleet. So, where is the Regia Mariner at the end of World War One? How is it going about potentially at least trying to acquire some form of naval aviation? Because that would really come back to bite them later on. How they then rearm during the interwar period, how they go over from basically being a small dreadnought fleet to having modern heavy cruisers, and eventually with the Littorio's modern battleships. There's a few of these really nice map spreads for various battles and formations, which is quite handy to get an idea of what the fleet was doing. It obviously covers the submarine campaigns, it covers their technology, radar, how the fleet operated, or perhaps didn't operate sometimes when the senior officers didn't cooperate. It struggles with the Regia Aeronautica, its intelligence division, which very often gets overlooked, code breaking and stuff, because very often the narrative is, Bletchley Park versus Enigma. It's obviously far more complicated than that in the European theatre, to say nothing about the Pacific theatre. And it's only on page 34, 35, so when you're about halfway through the book, that you actually get to them actually doing any fighting. So all of the first half of the book is essentially setting the stage as to why the Regia Mariner is where it is when it starts participating in World War II and how it got there. And, why certain things that then happen will happen in the way that they do. So you've got, obviously, summaries of places like the Battle of Calabria, with Warspite getting that really long-range hit, which is actually broken down into multiple sections. It also goes into the consequences. So obviously drawing on Italian sources, what did the Regia Mariner think of these actions? You've got the convoy wars, the various minor actions as a result of that. Then we're going into 1941, 1942. There's often also little breakout boxes for specific battles. Again, I hope the camera's focusing. I can't exactly tell. Which will give you a kind of a short intro as to what exactly is going on in this particular action. And then, of course, you get to the end where the Allies invade Italy. Italy signs an armistice, and that's the end of the war for the Regia Mariner. There's also a little bit of analysis at the back. So you can look at that. Obviously, how did the Italian ships perform, especially in comparison to their direct opposite numbers. There's a nice small print index at the back in case you need to find anything specific. And surprisingly for a book of this type, because usually books of this type have a minimal to no bibliography, mostly for space reasons and partly also because as summaries it doesn't tend to be needed, but there is a whole further reading section with both primary and secondary sources if you happen to want to follow up on any of the detail. So yeah, definitely recommend that. It's it's a really good book for what it is at the size that it is, and the Fleet series in general I've been pretty happy with. And that brings us on to our last book. This is the biggest one so far. It's quite the thick tome, although whatever paper stock they've used, this is actually quite light. This is I mean, it's solid, but it doesn't have the heft that you could use it as a melee weapon, which I don't know, that counts for a lot in some of my books for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but nonetheless, it's because it's light. Obviously, it'll be easy to carry around in a bag, on a train, bus, whatever. Don't advise you take it with you in a car if you're driving. Anyway, it's by Geoffrey R. Cox, and one of the things that perhaps people who are interested in that particular part of the historical theatre will know is, as you can see here, I appreciate that's quite small and blur if I put it that way. This is actually the fourth of 4 books covering the Guadalcanal Theatre. Now, going back to the cover, Devil's Fire, Southern Cross, you'll notice here, this is covering the period October 43 to February 44. And then you've got the first one, which is August to October 42. Then you've got November 42 to March 43. Those are the 2 periods that most people think of when they think of the Guadalcanal campaign. And, okay, to be fair, that is kind of how the Guadalcanal campaign on the island of Guadalcanal itself wraps up. But the Solomon Islands, the whole archipelago of islands of which Guadalcanal is one of the southernmost, the combat for that, with the big Japanese base at Rabaul at the other end, goes on throughout the war. So there's a whole other separate book, Dark Waters and Starry Skies, which goes from March till October 43. And then this one, which picks up in October 43 and goes through to February 44. And that basically walks you through the tail end of the grander Guadalcanal Solomon campaign arc. Now, being a somewhat larger tome, it is, of course, a little bit more difficult to summarize everything, but I'll note a few things. Firstly, there is a center section with various photos, some of which will probably be familiar to viewers of this channel, like the Haguro, the various commanders, and some of the after-action photos of various bombardments and so forth. But also some quite interesting ones, as you can see there. So, good little photo section, but of course the primary heft of it is the text. And in terms of that text, it's really well written, because some naval history books they can go a little bit too casual and flippant, which it can degrade the quality of the narrative somewhat, even if the actual scholarship is really, really good. If someone's just cracking jokes every 5 seconds, then it starts to feel less like history and more like a bit of a comedy sketch. This book, while it is not sort of stodgy like 3-day-old porridge, and therefore very accessible, when you start reading it, you find yourself going through it and thinking, actually, I want to turn the next page. Well, obviously, if you like naval history, and, well, if you don't like naval history while you're watching a naval history book review, but never mind. So yeah, assuming that you are the target audience, which hopefully you are, I think you will find the writing style just entertaining enough and just dynamic enough to want to make you keep reading, but still serious enough and scholarly enough not just to give an impression of being a well-researched book, because it actually is a very well-researched book. And that is evidenced by 2 things, both of which I really like. So just going to the back here. There we go. So we've got just over 400 pages of text as it switches over. So the actual narrative ends here on page 412, but as you can probably tell, there's still a good chunk of the book left after page 412, and that's because everything that's in the actual narrative is heavily footnoted. And while we're on the last page as well, this is something else I really like. This style of quoting people directly, both in terms of statements and reports, instead of going into massive amounts of italics and so forth. It's just like indented, so you know exactly when you're reading a quote from someone or a report rather than the narrative itself. So that brings us on to the notes section, and I'm just randomly, there we go, flip through to notes from chapter 6. So this is a combination of footnotes and actual full-on notes, and this is a style I really, really like. I think the only style personally that I prefer over this when it comes to reference works like this is like you see in D.K. Brown's books, where but I mean, to be fair, and you get that because his books are a much larger format. So in those cases, you get what I call marginalia notes. So all of these little footnotes would just be in the margins of the pages in the relevant places. And you sometimes then get these things, which are quite extensive additional bits of information that perhaps don't necessarily fit within the narrative, but do provide an awful lot of additional detail for a particular circumstance. So if I'm going through to this chapter 6, so this is talking about various B-25 bomber operations, specifically various reports about losses, rendezvous, how many bombers attacked on which particular day, and which squadrons they're from. You can very easily understand how, if you put that into the text when you're trying to describe a general series of bombing attacks, it could slow everything down. But it is quite useful information to have, and this medium of, here's the summary of what happened and the details that you need to know about in terms of the impact on the campaign going forward. But then if you also want to know specifically, was it 36 bombers? Was it 24 bombers? Were they from this squadron? Were they from that squadron? Were they intercepted? If so, how many? What losses were there? What types of aircraft intercepted them? You can just go into the notes and find out, which is the best of both worlds. So there's a huge amount of all of this. You actually go all the way up to page 480 with this, and then you get to the select bibliography, which starting on 481, and again, lots of small text, goes on to page 487. So huge amount of sources cited, and then a very nice, useful index. So, as I say, very well researched, very well written. I'm going to put it over here for the minute. And again, definitely worth picking up if you are interested in the Guadalcanal Summons campaign generally, and obviously the latter part of it specifically, because that's the bit that this covers. So, for example, I mean, obviously, if you want to get all four, then get all four. But if, for example, you've seen my series on the Guadalcanal campaign itself, which wraps up at the beginning of 1943 with Operation Key or KE, then maybe you'd want to pick up Dark Water, Starry Skies, and this, which, roughly speaking, will carry you through the rest of the operational period in this area. It also covers things like, the isolation of Rabaul and all those other fun things. So that brings us to I don't have three hands, unfortunately. I'm not part of a Gene Stealer cult. So those are the two new books from Osprey, both of which I would very definitely recommend. Obviously, given the size and scope of them, at rather different price points and different sizes, but both very useful for the parts of history that they're covering. And then if you can get your hands on it for, a secondhand shop, books, I don't know, maybe they occasionally pop up on Amazon or something, then definitely pick this up to have a look at how you go from HMS Victory, essentially, to HMS Warrior. And with that, I will say thank you very much for listening. Do you like this format? Do you want me to continue with it? And if you do want me to continue with it, but perhaps think that me just sitting here and talking to the camera and waving a book around like that is maybe not the best way, then suggest something else. Should I have a camera over a desk looking down? Should I just talk to camera and not wave books in your general direction? Should I go and stand next to all of these bookshelves that are around me rather than just sitting in my chair, which, to be fair, is easier for me, but may not be quite as entertaining for you? In any case, thanks again, as I say, for watching, and hope to see you again in another video soon. Bye for now.